Welcome to Research Relevant Bites. My name is Stephen Shaw from McGill University, and today we're going to introduce the complex topic of publication bias, what it is, why it's important, and what we can do about it, because this is really the key component here. What are we going to do about this issue that's important? Publication bias is that it involves the results of scholarly journals, the results of studies that appear in scholarly journals, tend to be statistically significant far more often than what we would expect. It's really difficult when you try to find what is the status of a construct in the literature, and you look for the effectiveness of an intervention, or you look for support for a theory, and you look and interestingly enough, what tends to happen is that every single thing you look for seems to be supported in literature. This cannot be. There are certainly a large number of things that are disproved or fall out of favor, but when you look at the structure of what is published in scholarly refereed literature, the vast majority are statistically significant. Now, why is that? That can't be true. No, it's an artifact, and the artifact is called publication bias. One thing to remember about the word bias, it has multiple definitions, but bias really means non-random error. So it's not that there's a tendency towards something or to cut on the diagonal. Those definitions of bias aren't what we're talking about. It's non-random error, which is that's what's used in psychometrics. But why do we have this where there's an overrepresentation of statistically significant results? Well, a lot of times, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit, but what tends to happen is many journals don't even accept papers with non-significant results. This isn't as common as most people think, but there are some journals that do that, and there's reasons for that. Like I say, we'll get to that. But the fact is that there's an assumption that if you do not find significant results, what that really means is your research is sloppy, poorly measured, poorly designed, variables poorly controlled. It's not really the case. Sometimes the construct simply cannot be supported. But this happens. Also, because of this history of not accepting results that are not statistically significant, what tends to happen is scholars tend not to submit papers that are not significant. This is referred to as the file drawer problem. This is actually more of an issue than journals not accepting papers. It's people just assuming journals won't accept the papers with non-significant results, and so they just don't submit them. And in fact, when you really want to look for the quality of work, a good place to look is actually master's theses and doctoral theses and dissertations, because in those, there's no real difference of something significant or not. Although I have had students come to me many times and say, can I graduate if my findings aren't statistically significant? Which is crazy. But this is the mindset that we've created, this culture that we've created. As I mentioned in the first episode of Research Relevant Bites, the issue is we have to change the culture. Publication bias is a lot about the culture. But the result of this bias is that the entire field, almost every single field in psychology, is skewed towards positive results or statistically significant results. If you're a clinician, that means anytime you look up some intervention you want to try, some evidence-based practice, you are going to find positive outcomes for just about everything. This is truly problematic and very confusing to people. In fact, what you tend to find is publication bias is more common in fairly novel concepts, things that are fairly new or very popular and trendy. What tends to happen is the first time something's supported, it is given with great fanfare. A lot of publicity happens. Often there's news reports or it gets into practice, and this happens with the first set of findings. It's not illegitimate, but they had giant effect sizes. One thinks it's the greatest thing in the world. And then what you happen is you have people replicate, and try to find the same result again. They use better and better research techniques. They use better sampling. They use more effective measurements. And inevitably, in every single research, what you find is that the better the research methods are, the more strictly controlled, the better sampling you have. What tends to happen is the effect sizes get smaller. And as you do meta-analyses, the collection of multiple studies on the same topic to try to find a common effect size, what you tend to happen is, in fact, it's not just a tendency, it's nearly a law that the better the research design is, because there's many metrics of quality of research design, the better metrics that you have for quality of research design, the smaller the effect size. So this tends to happen, and obviously what happens is if we want to publish things that are really exciting, show big effect sizes, everyone gets excited about it, we tend to publish stuff that's not that good. The quality of the design is just poor. So why is this important? Like I say, you will never learn what doesn't work. This is just as important as what does work. We waste time, energy. If we're working in clinical practice, we are doing ineffective activity. We're putting our resources in the wrong place. If we are doing we're doing basic research, we can't develop good theories. We go in the wrong direction. We waste money. We waste time. We waste graduate student effort. We waste our own time. So if you never learn what doesn't work, you've got significant problems. Also, because we have this selective reporting, and if we only publish significant results, we also have some really questionable research practices. As I mentioned, the better the quality of the research design, the tendency is for the smaller the effect size is, and the effect size is what we get excited about. This is the major thing. But if we just do better research, smaller effect size, less likely to get published. This makes gives us an incentive to do poor research design. It also, unfortunately, gives us incentives to commit fraud. If we make up the data to get the results we want with the biggest effect sizes, it's more likely to get published. So there's incentive for fraud. Science can never be the self-correcting thing we claim to be if there's publication bias that influences all of our publications with the same results. So the assumptions and why we tend to have it is that assumption that non-significant results are due to some kind of experimental error or failure to control. This is not necessarily the case, but this is a commonly held belief. So why does it happen? It happens because journals get status by having what's called a high impact factor. That's how often do their articles get cited by other journals. Kind of do people who write papers read, or people write articles, are their papers cited by other people who write articles? This creates an impact factor, which is numerically derived, and it's a measure of prestige of the journal. It's also for scholars. They are focused on their H index, which is a function of how many papers they've written and how often those papers are cited. They want to send it to a journal that gets cited a lot, has a high impact factor. How do you do that? You get things that are exciting, that are novel, that are innovative. That's the important part. And so what tends to happen when you do this and you focus on novelty and innovation, you focus on really, really, really crappy research design. That's what happens, and that's the outcome of publication bias. What also tends to happen is there's conflicts of interest. We want things to come out certain ways because we just feel it in our bones. It has to be this way. No, it doesn't. The data come out the way they come out. Good research design is a test. It can't be if the data come out one direction, it's a great study, it should be published. If it comes out another direction, it shouldn't be published. If the research question is important, and if the design is sound, meaning you're going to come up with a good test of the theory, then you've got quality research. That's what should be published. Not just, is it exciting, or is it innovative, or is it what we like? Now, I won't go through this because this is a more complicated area, but if you're doing any type of meta-analysis or literature review, you really need to have some form of a funnel plot, and there are many forms of them. In a funnel plot, the height, the primary height, the center point is the effect size. And each of these little dots that you see here, each of those little dots is actually stands for a specific study. You can see some of these issues on here, but the horizontal axis is the study result or the effect size, and the vertical axis, the y-axis, is the study precision. Usually it's a standard error of estimate or a standard error of measurement in some cases, but mostly standard error of estimate to see how precise or how detailed it is. If you have a good field of study without publication bias, what tends to happen is things fall generally in this triangle with a few things at the top, a few studies at the top, and more studies near the bottom. That is a common way that these things will work. And as you can see in these two examples here, although my picture seems to have covered one of them, if you look at the top of the funnel plots, it's fairly symmetric. It kind of, everything's pretty symmetric around that center point. That's kind of evidence of no particular publication bias. But if you look at the bottom one, it's asymmetrical. That's a sign you have publication bias. There should be something in that lower left quadrant there of the triangle that's missing. That means there's probably papers there that never got published. That's a sign that that field has publication bias, and your meta-analysis is going to have to be questioned because there's going to be bias in there. What can be done? We have to normalize non-significant results. This is really important. It's the quality of the research question. Is it an important question that's well couched in literature? And are you using sound research methods to test that question effectively? We have to promote journals that publish replications and non-significant results. Quality of work, not exciting innovation of work. There has to be full transparency of methods. This is a critical part. Exactly how did you do everything? Methods isn't something that you gloss over. It needs to be detailed. The first thing you should read in a paper is it important? And then how did you test it? Go right to the methods. Second, many journals are moving away from the idea of just exciting effect sizes that put you in the newspaper. What they're focusing on is registered reports. That is, your paper is accepted or rejected before the data are collected. It's accepted or rejected if the research is important, couched well in the literature, and the methods are sound. Then the paper is accepted. Then you collect the data. However the data comes out, the paper will be accepted. That's a good way to get away from publication bias. Also, these tools of open science, pre-registration, which is part of registered reports, is a really nice way to go. So registered reports, pre-registration is just one of the methods away from it. But mostly we need to focus on this culture of how we get away from exciting, innovative, flashy, and get towards asking important questions and testing it in the most sound way we possibly can. There's quite a few references on this, but I just put a few here for your future reading about how do we detect publication bias, why is it important, and some of the various methods. There's a whole bunch of methods out there, so I'm not going to go into the detail. But it's part of changing a culture is how we move publication bias from being something that negatively influences how we practice, how we develop theory, how we create new research and new research ideas. All those are impacted and impaired by publication bias. So let's be aware of it when we do our literature reviews, when we develop our projects, and let's work on changing the culture so that we focus on high quality research, not just simply large effect sizes. So that is our intro into the complex topic of publication bias. I will probably talk about this again in the future because it is extremely important. But thank you for attending this episode of Research Relevant Bites, and I hope to see you again with our next episode. Thank you and have a great day.